Good morning, members, and welcome to this meeting of the Education and Learning Committee. It's good to see new faces as well as old faces, to see our youth representatives, representatives of parents, teachers, and our churches. So we are now approaching the end of term tomorrow. I would like to take this opportunity at the outset of this meeting to acknowledge the hard work of all our pupils and staff over the last year, and thank their parents and carers for the support to our school communities. I'm sure these members of our committee will share with me a wish that you all have a restful and happy holiday. This meeting is being live streamed and recorded and will be made available for viewing through our Council's website. Remote participants, please follow the good practice guidance, which includes muting microphones and switching off your video when you are not addressing the meeting. Writing "speak" in the Teams chat function when you want to contribute. If you are in the hall, you can do this on your iPhone or iPad. Please don't repeat contributions already made by other members. No material should be posted in the chat function if it is intended as part of the discussion. The usual standing orders apply, including that of any votes will be undertaken by roll call. If any member has to leave the meeting, please either leave the Teams meeting for that period of time or write "leave" in the Teams chat function, and then join when you rejoin the meeting, so we can keep track of whether the meeting is quorate. All members should speak clearly and directly into the microphone when making contributions and when referring to reports. Please provide reference to the relevant page and paragraph to allow everyone to follow. Please focus contributions on areas where clarification is required or to propose an alternative to a recommendation. Item 1 on the agenda is a sit-errant apologies and Chair's approval of members' report participation. So I give that approval for remote participation. Tracy Sonko is here to support me. It's her job to keep me right, which is probably an unenviable task. Tracy, can you provide the sit-errant? Tell us who the new representatives are and any vacancies which apply to this committee. Please indicate who's participating remotely and inform us of any.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. We've got 23 members present in total, 11 members present in person in the chambers, being the Chairman, the Vice Chair, Councillors Hill, Ingalls, Little, Lowe, McGregor, Scobie, Stevenson, Wilson, and our church representative, Anne Barber. And we've got 12 members present on Teams, being Councillor Dashper, Karen Crothers, Davis, Dempster, Dennerley, Whitelaw, Young, and we've got our Parent Council representatives, Mel McGill and Laura Moody. Laura Moody being our new Primary Parent Council representative, present on Teams, and our Youth representative, Finlay Anderson, also present on Teams. Not present at the start of the meeting are Councillors Mayo, Councillor McCammon, Councillor Stitt and Councillor Wood, and our other youth representative, Ellie McConaughey. We've got 2 vacancies for our teacher representatives for primary and secondary, and until that nomination process is complete, we've invited along our previous teacher representatives, Kenny Pullen and Julie Irvin, to join us at the meetings. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Tracy. Welcome to everyone. Next item is number 2, declarations of interest. Do any members have any declaration of interest? And Councillor Paula Stevenson has her hand up.
Hi, it's just to put in the apologies for Davy Stitt. Councillor Stitt won't be here today.
Did you get apologies from Councillor Mail?
Noted that, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
And Councillor Carson.
Councillor
McCammon. Sorry.
Garden. Okay. Thank you. Item 3 in the agenda is a delegation to Education and Learning Committee. I'm going to ask the Director to introduce the delegations to the committee, and then I will open the debate to members. Here we have Gillian Bryson, a Director, Jim Brown as Chief Education Officer, and John Thin as the Head of Education, Learning and Resources with us today.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. By way of introduction to this paper, I wanted to say a few words, and thank you to members for allowing me to do so. We are responsible for the education and all that entails for over 20,000 children across Dumfries and Galloway schools and early learning centres. So we have 114 schools, 80 head teachers, 50 nurseries and as many partner providers and childminders who, in partnership with us, provide early learning and childcare across the region. So this is a significant scale of operation. As I know you understand, we have over 2,600 staff, and the Education and Learning Senior Management team are absolutely committed on your behalf to providing high quality education to give all our children the best possible start in life. So we, along with our schools, look forward to the continuing support and challenge from Education and Learning Committee, from the Youth Council, who remind us who we are here to serve, to our Parent Council representatives who amplify the voice of our parent community, with whom it's vital to work in partnership with, to our teacher representatives who provide the chalk-faced perspective, and the church representatives who represent the members of faith communities who contribute to the discussions and bringing their own unique spiritual and pastoral dimension to our contextual implementation of policy, and of course from yourselves as elected members and representing your constituents. So the scheme of delegation today sets out the function of committees as we exercise the statutory functions of the Council as an education authority. The two heads of service, as Chair introduced, will, over the course of the year, bring reports to you which focus on these duties of provision. So Jim Brown, as Chief Education Officer, is responsible for the quality of school education and achievement of the national strategic priorities, and John Thin, as Head of Learning and Resources, is responsible for the people, places and processes which keep the work of schools moving every day. So we very much look forward to working with you and happy to take any questions on this and further reports today.
Sorry, any questions, please? Everybody happy? Nobody online? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for that. We're now on to the recommendations below, which is members are asked to note the remit of the Education and Learning Committee as detailed at 3.2. Everybody happy to do that? Yeah. We'll note the remit. We're now on to item 4, Education and Learning Committee, appointment to outside bodies, report by Head of Governments. Tracy Sonko is here to assist members on any questions. I will open the floor to the volunteers for the positions on this. Tracy.
Thank you, Chair. First, I want to ask the question. You're looking for 6 elected members to Dumfriesshire Educational Trust, also Arundel Eskdale Committee and Nistdale Committee. Now, those 6 members split between this committee and these 2 area committees, or is it 6 from this committee and further ones that have been elected from other ones?
Thanks, Councillor Little. It's 6 from this committee. The other ones have already been appointed from area and Nistdale area committee.
Thank you. No, I was aware the other ones are appointed. I wasn't sure whether the number was less. So I'm happy to go on this.
Sorry, we've got one volunteer so far. I shall make it 2. Yeah, who's? Yeah.
I'm also happy to join.
Councillor Wilson?
Yeah, I'm happy to go on that as well, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So we've got four nominations. Anybody? And
I'm happy to join it as well.
Gail, are you volunteering?
No, I've already been appointed through area committee, as has Lynn Davis, so it's not that the Conservative group are sitting on our hands. It's just that I think we've probably put on who we can put on from the areas that are able to.
Thank you very much. How many more, Tracy, we've got to find?
One more, Chair, please.
Is there anybody not?
Councillor Dempster online.
Councillor Dempster.
Thanks, Chair. I'm already on appointed by the area committee, but it's not restricted to folk from Nithsdale. That seems to be what Gail thought. It's the education committee that places representatives. They can be from anywhere within the region, as far as I understand it.
Is that correct, Tracy?
Chair, I think what Councillor McGregor was alluding to was that they've already been nominated through the area committee, so they can't nominate themselves again because they're already sitting on the educational trust as appointed through the area committee.
Aye, Chair, but I'm saying it shouldn't be from Nithsdale.
Doesn't have to be from this deal. No.
I'm happy to go on it then if you don't have to be from the area.
Is that all our nominations, please?
Yes, thanks, Chair. So we've got Councillor Little, the Chair, Councillor Lowe, Councillor Wilson, Councillor Stevenson and Councillor Hill. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, members, for the positive contribution there. So we move to the recommendations. The member has to agree the appointment of 6 elected members, as noted by Tracy. We're happy with that. Okay. We're on to item 5: property, buildings, schools, asset class update. Report by Director, Skills, Education and Learning. Is Lauren available? Lauren is here. Lauren is available to assist members on any questions on the report. I ask that as I know that members will be keen to know of progress of the projects within their own wards, but if there are any specific questions on individual projects that we don't use the committee to discuss this. But Lauren is happy to update members on local projects through the normal channels out with the meeting. So it's an opportunity to scrutinise this report, but if you've got any individual ward issues which can be resolved by talking to the officials, then that's a much better process. So I'll open the meeting to member debate. She's got her hand up first.
Thank you, Chair. It's page 13 on table 4. Just a couple of wee questions. I see that there's a revised budget, Lauren, on all these things, and I was wondering whether that's extra works, or I'm sadly hoping it's not increased costs. I'm fearful that that's the answer. And the second question is on 3.5.1 about table 4 as well, that these works are currently programmed to start on site this financial year. Do we have a closer date to that? Because it's this financial year, and before we know it could be the end of the financial year, so it'd be really good to see how close we are to starting these works. And I do actually have a couple of colloquial questions that I will be hitting you up at some point soon. But just these 2 questions, please, Lauren.
Question, Lauren, from Councillor Little.
Sorry, yeah, thank you, Chair. I think in relation to the values in there, the changes on these, I think there's maybe a step I'll roll backwards, just for members, if you're able to indulge me for a second, I'll take us back through some of the process around how this works, because I think for some of the new members this will be really helpful, and hopefully that will also help explain why these numbers can change and why we can see variances in some of the numbers that come through on a quarterly basis. One of the things that's really important to remember in all the work that we do within the school asset class investment is that the investment is based on priority order. That priority order is determined by the condition of all of our schools. So we assess all of our schools on a regular basis. we look at the ones that are in most need of investment, and they're the ones that we invest in first. Now that's a pre-agreed committee process that we will look to revise and bring that back to members once we've got updated condition detail and things within that, because again that's the really important part, so that we know that where the investment is going is where it's needed first and foremost. Now, to be able to manage that across a £5 million capital investment programme takes a number of years to get those elements into the planning process. So we talk about a 3-year capital investment programme. Now, Appendix 2 gives you the details of where we're investing in the current financial year, where we're proposing to invest in next financial year, and where we'll be in the third one. They're really important for us to agree today as members, because that allows us to move forward with that planning process. Now, when we're looking at what has been highlighted through a condition survey as a number against how much investment that school's required, it's just purely based on the condition information at that point in time. We haven't engaged with the school to see what needs to be done to improve, for example, suitability or any other fundamental educational changes that we want to make to that facility when we're there. So the numbers change from first point of inception to a detailed discussion with the school around what actually we really need to do when we're there. That will see a variance in the financial value. And then we drill down as we get closer and closer to doing the actual construction works to a detailed design solution that's fully costed. Only when we've got a fully costed end solution do we actually have a little bit of cost certainty on what those numbers are. And that's what we're seeing in Table 4. So we had an original budget for Locker Briggs, for example, of 1.8. Now that was based on the condition surveys. We hadn't been to the school to see what else we needed to alter and adapt and to improve when we were there. We've done that. We've come up with a brief and the specification for that project. We've designed that out. That's been out to through our quantity surveyors to get an actual proper, more accurate, if you like, costing against it, and that's the variance. So it's not technically an increase in works. It's just a more accurate reflection of market values for the work that needs to take place to deliver the expectations for the school and the community there. And that's pretty much the same across most of the projects that we see in there. The only variance to that one, I would say, is Park Primary School and the nursery. That's an amalgamation of 2 projects, and you'll see in some of the other tables that there's environments of funding from 1140 funding pots to asset class pots, and it's just really saying we're not doing 2 different projects, it's in the same school, let's bring the money together into one balance, and we'll deliver it as one full project, even though it's paid for by 2 separate places. The investment process, I think it's important to emphasise as well that we are reliant on colleagues in other departments helping us and supporting us with this. We are educationalists, we know how schools work, we know how they need to deliver. We're not designers, we need our colleagues in property to do the design work for us. We need our colleagues in procurement to follow the correct legal procurement process to ensure that we're doing the due diligence on the value side of things, on the legislative side of things. And there are always time constraints involved in that, and that's again why we have a 3-year rolling programme to allow us to work through all of those stages. I think one of the things that I would like to give members reassurance on is one of the values highlighted at the beginning of the report is the extent of slippage. That's a huge number. £1.6 million is a huge variance from a £5 million pot. Now that is identified project by project on Appendix 1, and I'm happy to talk through that with members individually if that's of interest, because that's really when we're drilling down into individual schools. But you can see where there are some big numbers on the right-hand column about the acceleration slippage. These projects are not changing in terms of what's planned to be invested there. It's just about the timing. Some of it's absolutely been knock-on effects because of COVID. Some of it's about, actually, well, COVID's had a massive impact. Projects have taken longer, so our colleagues in property are still with the projects that haven't yet been finished, so they've not been able to move on to the next ones. So it's about the timing on it. Some of it is about inflationary increases through that, that we're seeing that across the cost of living, but we're actually seeing that in the construction industry significantly now as well. And material prices are up 20 to 50% depending on what they are. But what we're doing is we're ensuring that we're not watering down or adapting the end specification or the end product from a school's perspective. What we're doing is we're moving those pots of money around to make sure that we still deliver the same end user expectations. And I think the last thing to say on that, that there was a paper that went forward to FPT committee that talked about the overall level of slippage, capital slippage across the council. Within education, we are seeing a level of slippage of about 21%, which is the lowest amount across all the different asset classes. So actually, whilst that's quite a high valued number, I'm quite comfortable in that it's as good as it could possibly be given the circumstances of where the construction industry is just now with the resources that are available. Sorry, that was a very long-winded answer, but hopefully that helps explain the reasons why those numbers are different in the projects that I've highlighted there. In terms of more accuracy in when they'll be beginning on site, I'm happy to do that out with this meeting, just to talk you through those. They are all slightly different, and that might be something from a ward perspective every member is interested in finding out. But we've got all the detail for all of those just to see when their start on site date is. Sometimes it's very accurate because it's tendered and awarded. Sometimes it's indicative because we're not quite down that process yet. So, for example, Lochabriggs is much closer to starting than St Michael's, for example.
Are you happy with that very full response?
Thank you, Chair. No, thank you, Lan, for that detailed response. I'm aware that there's many different layers to getting a job done, and it's not just starting and that's it. I'm really aware of that. I'm glad, I understand there's going to be extra costs, as you said at the end there, but I'm glad to see that it's a more it's a more detailed... Oh. There's two of me. No one wants that.
Tracy's that.
No one wants that. That it's a more accurate, that's the word I'm looking for, it's a more accurate figure of what's actually needing done. So, happy with that. Thanks very much, Lauren.
Thank you. We've got Councillor Scobie, then Councillor Karen Crothers, and then Councillor Dempster. Councillor Scobie.
Thanks, Chair. And I'll preface my remarks on what Lauren has outlined in terms of the increased cost. And I'm looking at two here, Park, that's pre-war building, and Rafad, that's the late 60s. So they're pretty old and do require indeed a lot of work. But, Lauren says he was going to take us back. Let me take you back one even further, Lauren, because at the time when we were looking at the 1140, you will remember the drawing you had for a state-of-the-art building in Stranraer, I think it was at St Joe's, where we would house all the 1140 kids. And I ask myself the question when I look at these figures of an increase to 2,400,000 in Park and 1.42 at Rafad, whether indeed that money in the increased cost could have gone a great deal of the way to build, indeed, that state-of-the-art nursery in Stranraer. And when I ask myself the question, I'll now ask you, could this money have been used if we predicted or foresaw that was the increase to that? Could we have built that custom-built nursery for the 1140 as a state-of-the-art so that we could house all the kids under the 1140, under the one building that was on the table at the time?
Lauren.
I think fundamentally the question we need to ask even before the finances comes into it is, did we follow the blueprint? Did we need to build an extra facility when we had capacity already? And that was the essence of the blueprint, and that's what we followed. And I think we've held true to that. I think fundamentally what we were challenged with delivering was a programme that effectively doubled the amount of hours available across the board, with the expectation that we would use what we have, we would purchase what we could through the PVI sector, and then only then would we extend where there was a gap within that. So we looked right across the whole school estate and in every area across all schools, and where we had spare capacity that was underutilised, there's a cost premium sitting there. We're paying the revenue for it. There's no one in those classrooms because the pupil numbers don't exist. So we took those spaces and we converted those to nursery areas. Now, Stranraer was a very hot topic. We had quite a number of discussions around that. We battered those round about, and the end solution and the outcome from that was to use what we have, which was spare capacity in park. In terms of raw numbers, you know, if you take it very, very basically at could we have built a new facility for the values that we're looking at here? Probably not, if you stripped that back to just what the nursery element of that 2.4 is. The majority of that spend is actually on the main building and the school. The mechanical and electrical works within the building is tired, is dated, and needs to be improved. What we do get from bringing a project together is that economy of scale. We are stripping out throughout the whole building, and we're using some of that 1140 money to supplement asset class money. So it's one boiler rather than two in two separate buildings. It's all of these things that make a difference to it. So I think fundamentally we've still ended up in the correct place in terms of the final solution. I still believe that using what we have has a much preferable longer-term solution for us from a revenue perspective, because we've got to think about running these spaces for future years. But fundamentally, if you're asking directly around could we have built something else with the money that's there, I don't think it would have touched the level of investment that we would have needed for the size and scale that we'd have been looking at, particularly at today's costs with the level of inflation that we've seen.
Happy with that, Councillor Scobie?
I don't know if I'm happy with that. There may not be a coming together of minds in terms of, because it was not any of the schools that produced the drawings, and I'm sure Lan will confirm that was something that was presented to the schools as a possibility at the time, and I believe it was because the Scottish Government pulled the rug on it in terms of to look at capacity to the blueprint that you're referring to. So I don't think much preferable, notwithstanding that these buildings do need a lot of work done to them, as I'm sure others could argue across the estate.
Thanks, Willie. It would have been great to turn back time, but we are, and Lauren Foss has given an answer there. We're on to Karen Carruthers, Councillor Karen Carruthers. Good morning.
Morning, Chair. Apologies for not having my camera on. I don't know what's the matter with it, but it's not working. Morning, Lauren. My question's on page 18. Again, it goes back to the 1140 hours in the capital programme. I do see there is a section there for partner provider. Is that for, which has got a budget there, is that for the whole of the PVI sector, or is that one for a couple that have actually put forward some projects? And is there a particular budget that the PVI sector can actually bid into for any refurbishments? And what kind of percentage is that compared to what the local authority have got?
Did you get that, Lauren? Yep.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The capital value against the PVI sector was, we looked, again, following exactly what the blueprint dictated to us, that use what we have, purchase what we can through the PVI sector, and then looking to expand overall ELC provision, whether that was building inside a school site or looking at any gap areas and involving the PVI sector inside of those. So we brought that through the committee process where members were informed of, I think it was 4 or 5 locations where there was a capacity gap, and partner providers were given the opportunity to bid into that to say this is how they can support us in providing the capacity in those areas. So there was a number that were successful. Calder Bank, Kids Ahoy, Max Walton Playcare, Money Ive, all put in bids, all added the capacity that we required. So we set aside a level of funding that could support that. There was a threshold that it couldn't go above of £172,000. And the remaining money in there is, I think it's only Money Ive Playcare that have still to use up the last parts of that residual capital funding. There isn't anything set aside for the PVI sector to access in terms of capital for refurbishment, extensions, whatever they need to do. However, that's built into the hourly rates. There's a percentage within that allows expansion or the ability to reinvest into their own establishments for those normal everyday improvements. So hopefully that answers the question.
Any follow-ups, Karen?
Yeah, thanks, Chair, if possible. Just because Lauren's just mentioned hourly rates there. Have the PVI sector been told what their hourly rate is for August going forward? I know that there was a review in March and I know they had an interim sum, but do they know what that hourly rate is going forward? Because when you're taking into consideration that they've got to build in all of these additional costs and such like, then, you know, obviously they would need to know that going forward to be able to do that.
Gillian.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Councillor Crothers. We understand that we have relatively recently received the feedback from the open book exercise that the Scottish Government introduced, and that there will be a rate paper brought to the next Education and Learning Committee for members' consideration. Thank you.
Next question from Councillor Dempster.
Thanks, Chair. I've got two. The first one's on page 11, 3.1, 3.2. Unless I misunderstand what this paper is saying, the Finance Procurement and Transformation Committee will decide at the end of a financial year whether the funding is simply be carried forward by asset class, and that the FP team may wish to consider potentially redirecting unused funding to other asset classes. Surely this committee has a devolved budget. And I would argue, unless I'm misreading this paper, that Laran Foss is quite capable of dealing with the budgets we have and ensuring that the investment we make is carried out with this by this department with the funding that's available at the department. And I find it odd that another committee should want to intervene, for wanting a better word. So maybe, unless I'm reading it wrong, I'd be delighted to be corrected, Chairman. The other's a mere specific question, and although there is an agreement that I absolutely adhere to that we should not mention local issues, on page 22 there's a reference to Sanker Academy retaining wall and a £200,000 spend. So unless again I'm getting this wrong, this has been spent by the department repairing malicious damage to the wall on a very regular basis over the last year, partially demolished by youth, presumably from our area. I can't see folk travelling into the area to do such a thing. So my question is, it's on a corporate level, can we get a report from Laran on how much money this council is spending on malicious damage to school property, and what actions have been taken, whether about that, say, temporary CCTV, police involvement, education, or whatever, because I wouldn't like to think that it's unique to my ward and that we're doing absolutely nothing about it. There's certainly something that has to be done, because I've got new images for Laran for today with the wall partially damaged again. It seems to be a competition between the department and the youth about who's going to finish up with a suitable outcome. So although it's a mention of Sanker, it's a corporate issue about how much we're spending to repair malicious damage, and I'd be interested about the involvement with the FPT and what I think is an education department devolved budget issue. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much, Councillor Dempster, pushing the boundaries of corporate and parochialism. I think you've succeeded again. And also, we also share your faith in Laran has been able to manage budgets. But could you comment on the finance and procurement and also in Sanker?
Thank you, Chair. I think firstly the report at 3.2 is talking about last financial year. That's highlighted in there just to give members the reassurance that we were successful in retaining the level of slippage that we saw within the asset class. £1 million was retained to support the project at Noble Hill, and whilst 600,000 didn't get spent on school buildings per se, it was retained indirectly to the service by upgrades to cleaning equipment for schools through Alan Mawson's team. We've gone through the same process this year with all capital projects, all capital asset classes, any slippage coming together, Finance, Procurement and Transformation Committee taking an overview to say, is there something that we can do with the money that we've effectively got sitting in the bank and use it constructively now? It's not to remove it from asset classes, it's just to say you've not been able to spend it, so we've got money sitting that we could do something positive with. Can we do that now? Whether that's buying more electric vehicles or whether that's investing it into some sort of easy, quick spend infrastructure. Because in some instances, for example, if you came to me today and said, Lauren, we've got an extra £5 million, could you spend that? I probably couldn't. I would need to align quite a lot of ducks in the background just to make sure that we've got the resources to be able to do that. So some departments are able to spend money more quickly than others. As I say, there's a long process for to do this, isn't it? I think the reassuring thing is what we do is, because we know it's a forever onwards level of investment that always comes along, we don't need to strip down the project work that we're doing. We can just almost take money from future years to augment what we're doing, or make sure that we're not watering down the end product. In terms of the retaining wall, Councillor Dempster, that £200,000 actually isn't thankfully for the dry stain dikes round about the playing pitches. This is for there's a banked retaining wall to the back of Sankard Academy that's got some Harris fencing around it just now. That's an engineering project that needs dug out and made safe again, and that's what that volume of investments allocated against. The malicious damage and the vandalism is an interesting one. It's difficult for us within education to capture that data because technically we don't manage that process. We manage capital investment and where that's allocated to. It's our colleagues in property that manage all of the revenue and the repairs and the vandalism and the malicious damage side of things. But I can certainly ask my colleagues to give us that detail, and that's something that could be shared around if that's of interest to members. I'm sure that wouldn't be too difficult for them to print out a report on that.
I think members would like to take that offer. Councillor Dempster, are you happy with that reply?
I am indeed, Chair, satisfied and comfortable. The only thing is I see slippage on every other project, and I'll take it up with Lauren privately, but I just want to comfort that the projects have been completed, and if there's a saving in all of these projects, then that's a prize for everyone. Thanks, Lauren, and thanks very much, Chair.
Thanks for taking up the issues after the meeting with Lauren. Councillor McGregor.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Dempster's raised my point about FPT, which has now been answered, so that's good, or one of my points. I think just on the back of what we were discussing around partner providers, it might be useful, respecting commercial confidentiality, if we got a list of partner providers that have received funding through the capital funds, so that we better understand. It is public money, and I know that we have a list of our properties that are getting investment made on them, so even if it comes out through correspondence. My last question would be, what is PAS top slice? Because it's £250,000.
What is the answer?
We brought through committee the decision-making process around who those PVI sector partners were, but I can share that around. As I say, I think so I can point to that committee paper just to show the background as well, if that would be helpful. The top slice, it's always difficult to know quite what to call that, but effectively it's our colleagues in property, estates and programmes. That is their fee, that's the design fee, that's their salaries, that's their running costs, and that's our portion of that. Their existence as council employees is effectively a support service for us in schools and within non-schools. So it looks at their total running costs and then apportions that from a percentage point of view to the different values of asset classes. So we pay the highest percentage because we're the highest buildings asset class value. So it's based on those numbers, but effectively it's a running cost for our colleagues in property to deliver those services for us on our behalf.
Yeah, just a brief follow-up. So it's essentially an administration and professional fee that we're paying to them. You said earlier on that one of the issues with some of the slippage and getting other programmes up and running is a lack of capacity within property services, and I think we see that across a lot of the work that we do. Is there a mechanism that we as elected members could ask for additional capacity in that area? I'm aware that we've got 11 million sitting in reserves and money sitting in slippage. Is there something that we can do to bolster another part of the council that could then in turn be of benefit to us? Is that a request that we could make?
I think that would be really helpful. However, at this stage, I think we've been in a place where there were quite a lot of vacancies within the team, which have now been filled. We've also moved to a position just exactly as you described. If we don't have the capacity in-house, how else can we do this? They're not the only people in existence that have these skills. So we have a professional technical services framework. So we can now go out with the council to appoint someone that can do some drawings and designs and do that process for us. They tend to be on more smaller scale projects because it's easier. Last thing you want is to have someone managing other people when they could be doing the jobs themselves, so keep it to the smaller, discreter projects. But there are steps in place that should support and help that. I think it's worth a discussion in 6 months' time if that's not working, and where are our bottlenecks, where are the things that are holding us back as a service, actually, whether that's schools or non-schools, any capital investment from a buildings perspective. If the bottleneck is people doing the design work for us, we need to address that. But for just now, I'm confident that we'll see improvements and changes. I think the biggest thing that we've had is the fact that COVID has extended the length of time contractors have been on site, tying up the designers managing those projects to stop them then designing the next project, and we're catching up on that.
That gives me a bit of comfort, but I think certainly if it's something that we as members can assist with pushing forward, and of course it would be of benefit to local businesses as well, who are perhaps seeing a bit of a drop-off in other parts of the private sector wanting to invest, given the current situation, it could be a bit of a win-win. Yeah,
I think we share that, and if we can come up with some ideas and put a way of pushing this forward, we'll do it. I've got no more people wanting to speak, so we'll go to the recommendations. Members are asked, 1, to note the outturn position for financial year 21-22 as detailed in section 3.1 and Appendix 1, noting that the carry forward of 1.615 million from financial year 2021-22 into 2022-23 will be the subject of approval of the Finance, Procurement and Transformation Committee. 2, agree the 3-year allocation of funding across schools asset classes highlighted in section 3.2 to 3.3.1 and in detail in Appendix 2 and 3. Note the previously agreed 1140 capital allocations as highlighted within sections 3.4 to 3.4.2 and the full detail in Appendix 3. 4, note the 4 high-value projects within section 3.5 and 5, agree the project funding environments for Noble Hill Park and Laurie now. Are we happy with the recommendations? Noted and agreed. Thank you very much. Now moving on to Education and Learning Revenue Budget 2021-22 Outturn Report. Report by Director Skills Education and Learning. After discussion between the Vice Chairman, myself and Gillian Bryson, the Director, we're going to make a change to one of the recommendations to help bolster our additional support for learning service. I'll hand over to Councillor, to Gillian Bryson.
Thank you very much, members. So we have here the outturn report for the year. We have Colin Pentland, who is here to provide specific insight to the report today, and as the Chair highlighted, we had been asked to consider some of the concerns that had been raised by a small number of parents regarding the additional support for learning allocation. Last year we were able to access additional government funding around the COVID recovery, which was very helpful in terms of supporting children back into schools at such a critical time. However, this was 1 year additional funds, so The recommendation that has been brought forward for members' consideration by the Chair and Vice Chair today is that that £88,000 service underspend, which we could allocate to the learning assistant allocation for members' consideration. But we have Colin here to take us through the report if there's anything else that members would like to explore.
Colin, you want to go through the report, please? And Dad?
Nothing to add, Chair, but happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
So I'll open up to members of the committee, and I've got Jim Dempster online.
Thanks, Chair. I don't expect an answer today, but on page 35, schools virtual desktop technology, it says in the report that it's anticipated the full funding allocation will now be utilised by 2022-23. There is a long delay. It's been outstanding, and I've asked questions now for years on the completion of the broadband project in our schools. The broadband is in many schools, but the support mechanism within the schools, and I hope I'm using the right language because officers will know what I'm asking anyway, is not available. So for BIOD, which is bring your own device to school, that opportunity is not available for some of the schools in my ward. It's been outstanding for a couple of years. I don't expect an answer today, but for the next meeting, Chair, I'd be keen to have a report with your agreement about where we are with the completion of the scheme, with kids being able to come to school and connect their own devices. And I'll write particularly to officers about my ward, but it's a corporate thing again. We should have this completed. It's been going on for 2 years now, and that's probably a year or a year and a half far too long. It was meant to be a short success because of the COVID and kids having to engage in remote learning. Hasn't it worked? But I'm keen to see it brought to conclusion, and I'd be grateful if you'd agree, Chair, with a report coming back to members next month across the whole council, outlining where we are with individual schools, and if there's none completed, a definite date for that to be brought to a conclusion. Thanks, Chair.
Gillian.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dempster. Happy to do so. There is a 6-month infrastructure virtual desktop update due in September, and we'll make sure that the information that you request is encapsulated in that report. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thank you, Gillian.
Thank you. Pleased to assist you. We've got William Scobie.
Getting my Sunday title there. Aye, and I'm pleased to hear you, Chair, in your opening remarks on this report that you'll be looking at the recommendation and including a review of additional support needs. I think Gillian referred to it as a small number of parents. By my observation, then it's right across the board in literally all the schools where they are struggling to deliver on additional support needs. And what concerns me is that it seems to be, rather than assess-driven, it may be that it's budget restricted in terms of being able to deliver to the kids who need that additional support. So I think a review is needed, and it's needed as quickly as possible before the start of the August term. I only heard yesterday of one school where, you know, the requirement is 2-to-1 assistance, and that's no peculiar. There are others, I'm sure, throughout the region. It's one that I've been raising consistently, and indeed opposed the whole idea of taking almost £750,000 out of the budget and only restoring it by, I think it was about 340,000. So there still is that funding gap. And then I look at 3.9 in terms of a commitment to increase to 1,000, at least by 500, of classroom assistants. We don't have classroom assistants. We moved on to ASLs, but then it goes on to say that there's some 1.418 million of funding that has been given to Finance, Procurement and Transformation Committee. I think that we've got to be making a play for that extra funding to provide for the additional support needs in the schools. And rather than saying there's a budget and then going out to assess, I see it as the other way around. We should have been assessing before the break-up of the schools tomorrow, and then to come forward. And then it's for this committee to look at if indeed there is a shortfall in funding, which I would predict there will be. So in that respect, if we're following GAFIC and getting it right for every child, then I would hope that we're not leaving any child short in terms of their additional support needs, and that we do look at this in the review and how we deliver what is needed for our kids out there, who our prosperity, our future. So I would hope that that review will cover all this.
Okay, could you come in, Gillian Bryson, please? And
thank you. Absolutely. Thank you very much. We know, we've discussed this at this committee, and we're all concerned and we're all here to meet the needs of children. That's what we're here to do. We have over 6,000 children in Dumfries and Galloway who've got an additional support need, and most children have their needs met through the class teachers and don't require an additional support learning assistant. And the term in the phrase in the paper, councillors, was yes, we have learning assistants, and the commitment from government was for classroom assistants or pupil support assistants. So that was a national drive, and we would interpret that locally to employ learning assistants. But we work with our head teachers every year to evaluate the pupils' needs. So coming back to you in terms of my comment regarding a small number of parents, I recognise that there has been some concern from parents, but we do have 21,000 parents across Dumfries and Galloway, and it is a relatively small number, although these parents, every parent's view is important. So from the 114 schools whose needs were evaluated, we have 14 schools who raised concerns, and it is now 12 schools who we continue to work with that their concerns for their allocation. So it is not every school who has raised concern. There are every year there are some schools have more allocation and some schools have less. So 14 schools raised concerns with us. 2 of those concerns have been resolved because the needs of children fluctuate all the time. So in the time that had elapsed, those 2 schools were due additional allocation and had their allocation increased due to that information we'd gathered. The allocation for next term is more than we've had in this council before, and we thank members for that allocation. I think you'll also see in the report that there is 1.114 thousand, so over £1 million of devolved school budget is still in schools, underspent. So DSM is underspent in our schools by over £1 million for this year, which is £500,000 more than the previous year. Now, clearly it's not always where the school budget is, where the need is, but there is an issue here where schools are responsible to meet their needs of pupils from their own devolved resources in the first instance. So our head teachers are responsible for their budgets, and they manage the resource to meet the needs of their pupils extremely well. So the first port of call would be for the school's DSM to manage these children who live in their catchment and meeting their needs. And our very valuable targeted specialist support is in addition to that. So I can absolutely assure you, and Hugh and Jim are on the call today for other specific questions, but I absolutely assure you that members had already set us off in a process of review. We will bring a paper to Education and Learning Committee in September, which will outline the 3-year allocation process, and we will make sure that that is communicated and consulted upon, so that we are not in this position every year. It's not helpful for anyone to be in this process. We try to make this process tedious because children's needs change all the time, and there will be concerns about a 3-year allocation process because needs change on a weekly basis, and if you get a resource for 3 years, your school community might change significantly in that time. But we will consult on it because none of us wants to be here every year. It's too important. So thank you for your patience as we work towards that.
Thank you for assurance, Gillian. We've got quite a few people waiting to speak. I've got Julie Irvine online, Chrissy Hill, and Paula Stevenson. We'll start with Julie Irvine, and give us a primary school perspective.
Thank you. My question was really to do with, I noticed that in 3.4 that there is an underspending, but it's actually due to non-teaching staff vacancies. And we appear to have, we've had money this year in schools to spend on support staff, but we've been unable to find support staff to hire. So there's a bit of an issue with recruitment and retention. And it also then links in with the increased funding for teachers as well, because we have once again taken on lots and lots of probationers. And at the end of the probationary year, there's not very many jobs. So we have this great influx of teachers and then it fizzles away and we struggle to get supply staff, we struggle to get the support for children. And I just wonder if the authority are looking at that recruitment and retention for support staff, but also for teaching staff.
Gillian.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Julie. Yes, I think it's a point well made that it's not just the money for additional support for learning, it is the people. We need the people. So again, I can assure this is not easy in that there is a challenge across Dumfries and Galloway, in fact across Scotland for workforce, and you know in our work with health and social care that everyone is looking for suitably qualified staff at the moment. So we are working with our colleagues and we are part of the Workforce Summit planning, which is taken forward in September, and we need to make sure that these jobs are as attractive and as well supported as we possibly can. These are careers. These are important careers as part of our education system. And we're working with our trade unions at the moment to look at qualifications routes, training routes and support routes to try and make these jobs as attractive as possible within our system. And as I say, working with our colleagues and NHS as part of the Workforce Summit for Dumfries and Galloway in September. In terms of teaching workforce, John is here today. Sorry, I'm just looking over at John here, but you have the probationer teacher numbers at your fingertips if you'd like to make any comment on teacher recruitment. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, thanks, Julie. It's a good question, and again, just echo the Director's point that in terms of all staff, it's trying to provide those career pathways for staff coming into Dumfries and Galloway. We need to absolutely link with that Workforce Summit to ensure that we've got those pathways and then build that sort of training programme in behind so people are seeing this as a career, not just as a job. I think that's critical. We also, and as been reported previously, we've also ensured that as part of the additional funding for additional teachers to Dumfries and Galloway, we've reinvested some of that. And one of the areas of business, if you like, that we've taken forward is to bring in a recruitment and retention lead officer, a secondment from one of our secondary schools who's working very carefully and very well in terms of trying to develop a plan that we can then implement to ensure that we're looking at our current workforce, our current demands on that workforce and what that will look like in the longer term. With the likely increase in provision for ELC, for example, as we move to an increased provision for 2-year-olds and 1-year-olds in the future, the reduction in class contact time for teaching staff, which is very imminent in terms of the number of additional teachers we're going to require. So whilst at the moment we would accept that, yes, we absolutely are committed to bringing in our quota of probationer teachers, and that's part of our government funding, so we're required to take in the amount later date after the summer of probationer teachers. We still find that we still don't have enough, and in particular in certain geographic areas within Dumfries and Galloway, and also in certain subject areas, and that's echoed and replicated nationally. So we're very keen to continue our recruitment drive to ensure that we've got the right quality and quantity of teachers, and then also in the right places in Dumfries and Galloway. And I think it's also important for this committee to recognise the challenges that I think the cost of living crisis is going to have on our recruitment and retention of staff, in particular in our more rural areas. The cost of fuel, for example, for teachers to travel from one place to another might have an impact, but that will probably have an impact on our health and social care colleagues as well. So again, I think all of these things, if you like, need to be looked at in the round in order that we provide a really clear strategic approach to looking at our recruitment needs, not just now, but what's the next 3 years, what's the next 5 years, what's the next 10 years potentially going to look like moving forward. Thank you.
Julia, do you want to come back on that?
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Councillor Chrissy Hill. No.
Hi. Good morning, everyone. Just a couple of points Councillor Scorby picked up on. The 1.4 million, can I ask, we didn't sort of like get clarity on what's happened to that. You know, it hasn't been spent. So how is it going to be spent? Where is it? Can that not be spent on support for LSA and additional support needs? Also on the recruitment and retention, you know, you're saying that there's money 3.4 there for staff. We heard from the primary teacher who said, you know, they couldn't get staff. There's a number of probationary teachers who have just finished their year who are now looking for jobs and are informing us that there's no jobs available within the authority. So I'm under some disillusion there as to how we're not able to recruit them if there is money there to recruit them. And also when we talk about learning support staff, you know, there's a number of staff that are at retirement age or coming to retirement age that have asked for early retirement from the council that haven't been allowed to take early retirement even though they've not asked for a package, which if there had have been, that would allow younger, you know, newer staff to come in that we then can retain. There's also a number of, you know, I know PEF funding gives a lot of extra support in schools. But when you're talking about learning support staff, maybe the retention would be there if there was some sort of security for these members of staff. Because there doesn't appear to be any permanent positions, so there's no security. So then how as an authority, you know, are we going to retain these staff? How are we giving them, you know, an opportunity to work in our area within the workforce, especially qualified staff, you know, in ASN or learning support, if we're not giving them permanent positions? Going back to when we're talking about schools across the authority have their allocation, that's great. Is it an allocation based on children who have diagnosed specific needs, or are we looking at COVID recovery? Are we looking at the health and well-being of these children? You know, and how many children are in the school? Not necessarily the amount of children, but the amount of children that need support. I don't see that, you know, 2 schools governed by 1 head teacher with 150 children only warrants 3 learning supports across the 2 schools. I find that really difficult from coming from an educational background and working within a classroom and seeing these staff and these children suffer. And so I totally get where parents are coming from, and you know, I don't understand why this 1.4 million isn't in the budget or hasn't been put to the budget to support this. Can I have clarity on that, please?
Yeah, there's a number of questions there. Have we got 1.4 million to spend? I would love that. And there's lots of other points that's been raised by Chrissy.
Thank you very much. I'm picking up on 4 themes, but please remind me if there's anything that I don't cover in my response. In terms of the funding, of course, the funding set out on page 26 is the end of the financial year. So we've still got the summer term, which tends to be our most expensive term. We've got our summer term and our holiday payments. So that isn't the end of year. But I do take your point that there is some allocation in that system for the schools going forward. So and you can see also in the policy development funding, in Appendix 3, you can also see that we have realigned the policy development funding towards building capacity within the learning assistant role, because that is absolutely critical for exactly the points that you raised, that these are posts where we require, these are careers, these are not casual jobs, these are careers, and although some staff do have temporary contracts, many of our staff have permanent contracts, and we would be looking to bring as many staff as is possible onto permanent contracts for the points that we made earlier. These we will be looking through the work that John highlighted to make sure that these are rewarding jobs where there is appropriate support, training and qualifications and a career structure through in that learning support arrangement. That is something that was actually planned 2 years ago, and we are now back on that agenda with the trade unions looking at that training and qualification process. We also have opportunities for modern apprentices and for graduate apprentices and for other roles coming into that education workforce. And again, we're happy to discuss with you the approaches that we're taking so that we can make sure it's as well informed as possible. In terms of the teacher refresh, you made reference to the more experienced teachers who are looking to step back. although they may not have looked for a package, they will provide pressure on the pension pot, and so sometimes it's not possible to allow people to go early with additional years. However, it's something that we have regularly looked at as part of our budget planning, so where it is financially appropriate to do so, we can introduce a teacher refresh programme, and have done that over a number of years now for the reasons that you set out. And in terms of the question you raise around the allocation based on head teacher judgment, I don't look at the individual needs of the individual children. Their head teachers know the needs of the children best, and it is the head teachers who submit their evaluations of the needs that they cannot meet at a school level, and they submit those to us. So you make points around a formula based on the numbers of schools, and we have already discussed, we have great sympathy for the schools who do not have a big resource to allocate. If you're sitting with 1,000 pupils and the requisite staff, you have more resource to have some flexibility, to have some headroom with. If you have 3 small schools, that is very difficult. That is very difficult, and those are the individual cases that Hugh and the team are looking at, particularly with our cluster head teachers. So our small schools, the jam is spread very thin when you have very, very small numbers of pupils across 3 bases, and I know some of our head teachers have raised concerns about the way that we have allocated the resource to them, and that we will deal with those cases as a priority over the coming days. I hope I've answered your questions, but I'm happy to continue this discussion about workforce development.
Chrissy, are you happy with those ones, or does that give you some food for thought? You've raised some very, very relevant questions and challenges for the Education Authority, and I think these are things which are on an ongoing basis we're trying to deal with.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the answers on that, and I'm looking forward to, the next committee meeting where, hopefully some of those things can be clarified and some figures and, numbers can be brought back to committee. I just do have concerns where, sometimes I understand there has to be a network of how the learning support is spread out. There has to be a way of doing that. I just sometimes think it shouldn't necessarily be based on number of heads, number of pupils within a school. I think the needs need to be looked at more importantly than the amount of people within the school. Thank you.
We've got to base it on needs. The Vice Chairman, is that specifically about Councillor Hill's point? Okay, I'll let you in before Councillor Stevenson.
Yeah, there's been a lot of really good comments made, particularly by Chrissy and Willie there, and I think they're all really relevant. I have to say that Richard and I have been working quite closely with the Directorate to try and address some of these issues, and what we're really keen to see is to acknowledge all these issues, have a proper review to look at all the issues, and particularly professionalisation and job security. I think that's absolutely crucial that we get down to that. And one of the issues that I know that they're looking at closely is training. The whole idea of moving from classroom assistants to LAs was the learning aspect. And it's not just about academic learning, it's about life skills and things like that. So the LAs are hugely important, as are the teachers who have got that expertise. So short term, we think the £88,000 can help in the short term, but we need to look forward and have a proper review of the whole situation, including the 3-year allocation with inbuilt flexibility because things change. So certainly Richard and I recognise, and Paula, we've had really good conversations about this. We recognise from our perspective that things need to be looked at, so you can be assured that we'll be pressing on with everything that you mentioned and Willie as well.
Thanks, Councillor Jimmerson. And Paul has been waiting patiently. Councillor Stevenson.
Yeah, I would really welcome a review on this. More so because I feel personally, and I think it would take a lot of the stress out for everybody involved if this happened a lot earlier. So it's how we can support the Education Department to get this done earlier on in the year, so that there's not this anxiety at the end of term. Even if that moves to a 3-year review, there's always going to be a year where that's an issue. And one of the other things I would like to see in the review is actually some of the parents involved. And some of the staff themselves. And I'm quite aware that a lot of the assisted learning support staff are going to be women, and, part-time temporary contracts when you have a family to look after are not great for women at all. You know, we've got kids to look after ourselves. So yeah, I definitely think that needs to be looked at for the sake of assisted learning support. So yes, so I welcome a review, and thank you for putting that in.
So Gillian, how can we take this review forward? How can we take a review forward so that we can do things differently in the future?
Thank you very much, members. So the review has commenced, and we have reported on 2 or 3 occasions now to Education and Learning Committee around the principles of that review. But we have added impetus now, and we will be bringing a paper to Education and Learning Committee in September with further proposals to you. And again, to reassure, I think we're all thinking along similar lines in that we have already met with our Parent Council representatives who asked to be involved in this. So we have Laura and Mel who raised this with me at our meeting last week, and we will make sure that the consultation reference group has young people as stakeholders and has our parent representatives on that.
Paula, you want to come back? Are you happy with that? So I think we'll have to put in a recommendation about, or bringing the paper back to
Councillor Stevenson.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just like to say, sorry, that I would like to think that when we do the review, one of the things we'll look at is how we keep that support in place for that pupil, because I think it's very important to acknowledge that there is a relationship built up there, and sometimes that's just as equally as important as anything else for that specific child.
We'll have a recommendation about this paper which comes back to committee in September. I've got Councillor McGregor.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's been really helpful, and Paula and Chrissy, I think, are spot on with their comments. I think we need to have almost 2 reviews. We need to have a workforce planning review because that's absolutely pivotal at the moment. Clearly, the funding that we've had in the previous 2 years was non-recurring. It was very helpful at the time and it assisted with COVID and COVID pressures and COVID recovery, but we weren't able to utilise that on a permanency basis, and I think that that's very difficult for people to understand. But the additional funding, the 1.4 million, which is baselined and will be recurring, gives us the opportunity to begin to offer some posts on a permanency basis, and we need to look at that. So I would be asking if you're going to move additional recommendations that we have a report at some point in the future at a time that is appropriate for officers to put it together around with colleagues in HR around workforce planning, recruitment and retention. I know that social work held a recruitment day last year in respect of care at home, which was really successful, and I think on the back of that day alone they ended up with about another 30 applicants. So we need to sort of look at what other departments are doing and actually what other councils are doing in respect of workforce pressures. But within that, we also need to look at a teacher refresh and a further school support staff refresh. Now, I appreciate that that may have costs attached to it, but that's for elected members to decide whether that will be a worthwhile thing to do. With the review of ASN and ASL provision, can we contain within that what mitigations are there through devolved school management budgets and PEF? Because I think that we've got into a very complicated situation now where we have core funding through council, we have funding through PEF, we have funding through devolved school management, we have many crossovers, we have staff that have been recruited through PEF who are maybe doing the role of an ASL or an ASN, but as we know, if they're there for 2 years, they do become permanent, but they're maybe not needed by the head teacher at that point. And there's a lot of complications within all these different pots of funding, and it might be interesting to look at all the different pots of funding as well, because I know there's a lot of individual ring-fence schemes which possibly assist with some of the pressures in ASL, but not all of them. So I'm maybe putting more work on your table than I should be, but I think we need to get a very holistic whole picture.
Yeah, I think you bring up some very good points there, Gail. So,
absolutely, our services all about people. 70% of our budget is on staff, and we have to have the staff to support the young people. So I'll commit to you to bring a workforce paper back with the points that you raise and continue the discussions with the trade unions on our training programme for our support staff. Thank you.
Okay, as usual, Mr. Councillor Scobie will have the last word before we go to the recommendations.
No, Chair, I don't think you let me back in, but nevertheless, you know, it was the point being made by Gillian, and I appreciate what she's saying. And as I say, I was delighted to hear that we're actually doing a review. But other times, I felt I was banging my head against the brick wall. But it was on your point that you made, Gillian, in terms of, and again, I appreciate it's for the head teachers to submit their needs. And I'm sure you have those all before you, but then you talked about priority schools. I would hope if a school does come back, and that's any school that feels maybe I haven't assessed this quite correctly, or there's an opportunity to come back, that they do come back, and that we don't just say, well, this is a priority, you fall out with that priority. And it's just, I'm seeing a nod of the head there, so I'm taking that as yes, that will be the case.
Thank you. And by that, I meant that a small school has very limited flexibility in their DSM and a devolved school management budget. A large school who has perhaps asked for and requested additional resource but is currently sitting on significant funds within their own budget, we would question why they were not using their own budget first. That would be what I meant by that. Thank you.
Thanks. We'll move to the recommendations. Do you want to speak about the report we're getting there? What do you want to say about that in the recommendations, or Gillian?
I think, if I may, Chair, there is already a review, a supporting learners review expected to the September committee. So that has already been a decision by members, so we may not need to raise that as a specific recommendation today, unless Tracy would feel it was particularly helpful. But I can commit on record at the moment to say that there will be a supporting learners paper in September, and we will work either at September or the first possible committee to bring a workforce paper to committee also.
We don't need to make that a recommendation then, but we've all heard what's been said at the committee, and the paper that comes forward will hopefully cover everything there.
I mean, I made quite an ambitious request around PEF and DSM and all the other. Now, I'm very aware that schools are breaking up tomorrow, and you might not be able to get all of that intel. So I think, you know, if we have an initial report and then a further report with all the additional information. Yeah.
So if we could go to the recommendations. Members are asked to note the financial pressure. The financial pressures associated with COVID-19 pandemic within education and learning budget as detailed at section 3.5, and that these pressures have been fully funded within the additional funding received by the Council to support the impact of COVID-19 in financial year 21-22. 2, that excluding the impact of COVID-19 additional costs which were fully funded through the application of additional Scottish Government funding, an understand of 88 was delivered by Education Learning for the financial year 21-22, and we've got a change to recommendation 2.3, which is on the screen as well on the chat, and that is now that the underspend of 88k be allocated to provide additional hours of additional support for learning assistance and this learning assistance staffing budget. And we have 4, note a closing balance of 1.114k in relation to the devolved school management accounts, with 460k being transferred into account in 2021-22. And note the utilisation of the agreed policy development allocations applied to the 21-22 education and learning services budget as detailed in Appendix 3. Are we all happy to note all these ones? Thank you. And Yes, which brings us to number 7. Any other business deemed urgent by the chair due to the need for decision? There are no urgent decisions which have been brought to my attention. So it's just we've wished all our pupils and staff, and parents, a good break over the summer. There's a break in the council, but I think there's still quite a lot of work for councillors to do over the summer, as Councillor McGregor will probably agree with me. So have a good holiday and keep up the good work. Thank you very much. The next meeting date is Tuesday the 20th of September 2022. Thank you very much for your attention.